Right now, as you are watching this, two entirely separate American emergency response operations are running in parallel on opposite sides of the country. And the reason that word disturbing sits in this video's title is not either event on its own, but what their simultaneous arrival reveals about the country's ability to absorb what is now happening with increasing regularity every autumn. On the morning of August 15, 2026, Hurricane Fernand made landfall on the Louisiana coast near Cocodrie as a Category 4 hurricane with sustained winds of 215 kilometers per hour. The storm surge of 4.5 meters, flooding a 200-kilometer stretch of coastline, and rainfall totals already exceeding 40 centimeters across parts of southern Louisiana and Mississippi. Cocodrie is inundated, Highway 1 has been overtopped, Terrebonne and Lafourche parishes are in the dark. The confirmed death toll stands at 11, with search operations barely underway. Louisiana Governor Landry has activated the full state emergency response. The Cajun Navy is deploying. And FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell, who was replaced this year, but whose successor is now running the same playbook, has federal disaster declarations moving before the storm's eyewall has fully cleared the coast. This is a serious hurricane emergency, on its own, in a state that has more experience with them than almost any other. At almost the same hour, Fernand's eye crossed the Louisiana coast, 2,500 kilometers to the northwest, the Pacific Cascade Complex, a merged group of 5 wildfires burning across the Oregon and Washington Cascades since. August 3rd made a run that had been forecast for days but arrived faster and more explosively than anticipated. Driven by a strong easterly wind event down the Columbia River Gorge, the complex's leading edge swept through the communities of Cascade Locks and Stevenson in the gorge, forcing the emergency evacuation of over 45,000 people across Multnomah, Hood River, and Skamania counties. Interstate 84 is closed. The Bonneville Dam power infrastructure is threatened. Air quality across the entire Portland metropolitan area collapsed within hours into the hazardous category, and by mid-morning, smoke had reached Seattle. 2 fatalities have been confirmed. Both firefighters killed in a rapidly shifting flame front. Governor Kotek has activated the Oregon National Guard. Washington's mutual aid response is already crossing the state line. 2 states, 2 entirely different disasters. Same day. And on paper, the same national response system, FEMA, the National Guard, the mutual aid networks, the airborne firefighting resources, the specialized federal search and rescue teams is now expected to handle both simultaneously at maximum intensity. That is where the word disturbing in the title becomes technical rather than dramatic, because the American Federal Disaster Response System was not architecturally designed for concurrent multi-region mega-disasters. It was designed for a world in which the peak of Atlantic hurricane season and the peak of western wildfire season did not routinely overlap at maximum intensity, and that world does not exist anymore. Today we break down what is happening at each end of the country right now, why the increasing overlap of hurricane season and wildfire season is a structural change with structural consequences. The specific institutional stress points where America's disaster response system can be broken by concurrent events. The aircraft, the crews, the hospital capacity, the money, the September 2020 double crisis that most Americans lived through without ever quite realizing was the trial run for exactly this. And what a country whose emergency responses were never designed to happen at the same time now has to reckon with, as the same time becomes the new normal. No guessing, no dramatizing, just the events, the systems, and the real stakes. Drop a comment right now. Are you in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, or anywhere in the path Fernand took inland? Baton Rouge, Jackson on into the Ohio Valley in the days ahead? Are you in Oregon, Washington, or under the smoke plume drifting east across Idaho and Montana? Tell me your state, your community, and what your situation looks like right now. And for everyone else, had you ever thought about the fact that America's peak hurricane season and peak wildfire season now overlap by weeks in a way they did not do a generation ago? Because that overlap is the story beneath both of today's headlines. Subscribe right now if you want live tracking of both events, the recovery timelines, and every major national disaster development covered as it happens, completely free. A thumbs up helps this reach both the Gulf communities under Fernand and the Cascades communities under the fire, because both of them deserve to be seen at once. Let us go for 6,000 likes. Now, let us start with what makes these two events Together, harder than either would be alone. The American Federal Disaster Response System rests on a few specific categories of resource that operate as a shared national reserve. When a region is hit by a large disaster, the region's own capacity handles the immediate response. Its State National Guard, its State Emergency Management Agency, its mutual aid agreements with neighboring states. If the event exceeds regional capacity, federal resources flow in. Those federal resources are shared. There is only one FEMA. There is one urban search and rescue system with 28 specialized task forces distributed across the country. There is one national supply of very large air tankers for wildfire suppression, the Type 1 heavy tankers that drop 4,000 gallons per pass, currently numbering fewer than 20 aircraft nationwide. There is a limited fleet of federally contracted heavy helicopters. There are finite, mobile emergency communications systems, finite medical shelter capacity, and finite pools of trained incident management teams. When one region needs an unusually large fraction of that pool, the system flexes. When two regions need it simultaneously, the system chooses. Air tankers are the clearest example. As of the morning of August 15th, the National Interagency Coordination Center in Boise, Idaho, which allocates federal wildfire aviation resources across all active incidents, is running at maximum draw. All available Type 1 heavy tankers are committed to western fires. Several are staged at Redmond and Klamath Falls, specifically for the Pacific Cascade Complex. Simultaneously, FEMA is mobilizing rotary wing assets, helicopters for search and rescue across coastal Louisiana. Some of those helicopters come from the same National Guard units, some come from the same contractor pool, some are Coast Guard assets that could equally be flying in either operation. The staging decisions being made this morning in Boise and Washington and in Louisiana are decisions about which region gets which aircraft on which day, and those decisions are being made in real time by human dispatchers weighing incomplete information about which mission most needs which platform. The hospital surge capacity is the second stress point. Louisiana's hospital system is now processing storm-related injuries, medical evacuations of ICU patients from flooded facilities, and the ongoing dialysis, oxygen, and pharmaceutical needs of a population whose power grid is down. Portland area hospitals are simultaneously absorbing smoke inhalation cases, burn victims, and evacuees with chronic conditions displaced from care. Federal medical response teams, the National Disaster Medical System's specialized units, are finite. Deployment decisions between the two regions this week are being made against a background of both regions genuinely needing them at once. The financial system feels it too. FEMA's Disaster Relief Fund is a specific pool of money appropriated by Congress and drawn down as disasters occur. Between 2000 and 2010, the fund's annual draw averaged around $8 billion. Between 2015 and 2024, the average tripled. Concurrent megadisasters accelerate the draw dramatically, and the last several years have repeatedly required emergency supplemental appropriations from Congress mid-fiscal year to keep the fund solvent. Two simultaneous federal disaster declarations of this magnitude in mid-August, arriving before the peak weeks of the Atlantic hurricane season, have even fully begun. Put fiscal year pressure on the fund that historically would not have been seen until October or November. This is a specific meaning of disturbing in the title, not the individual severity of Fernand or the Pacific Cascade Complex, though both are severe, but the arrival of two events at the level of national federal response at the same time, in a system whose reserves were never built to be spent on two full crises in parallel, indefinitely. And now the harder question. Is this actually new, or does it just feel new because two things happened this morning? The honest answer is that it is not entirely new, but the frequency and intensity of the overlap is. The Atlantic hurricane season and the western wildfire season have always shared calendar space in late summer and early autumn. What has changed is that both seasons have intensified, with hurricanes more frequently reaching high category status due to record ocean temperatures, as we covered in our Atlantic hurricane cycle video, and wildfires burning larger areas over longer seasons in the west, and that the overlap window has widened. Fire seasons that used to end in September now routinely run into November. Hurricane seasons that historically peaked in mid-September now begin producing major events in July and continue through early winter. The zone in which both categories of extreme event can hit simultaneously at maximum intensity has expanded. From a narrow window of a few weeks to a period spanning most of August, through October. Which brings us to the contrast that most directly frames today. Because in September 2020, this country ran the trial version of exactly what is happening this week, and most Americans lived through it without understanding what they were. Seeing on August 27, 2020, Hurricane Laura made landfall on the Louisiana coast as a Category 4 hurricane, the same category, the same coastline, the same class of event as Fernand today. Laura killed 47 people directly, caused $23 billion in damage, and required a major federal response into a region whose Hurricane Katrina recovery had never fully been completed. Within the same weeks that Laura's response was fully deployed, the American West was experiencing one of the worst wildfire seasons in its history. The August Complex fire in Northern California, a merged wildfire that eventually burned over 1 million acres, the largest single fire complex in California's recorded history, was actively expanding. Colorado's Cameron Peak fire started August 13th and became the largest fire in that state's history. And on Labor Day weekend, September 7th and 8th, an extreme wind event drove the Alameda, Beachy Creek, Lions Head, and other Oregon fires through communities in the Cascades and the Rogue Valley, killing 11 people directly and destroying thousands of homes across communities like Phoenix and Talent that were essentially erased overnight. For roughly 6 weeks in late August and September 2020, the American Federal Disaster Response System was managing a Category 4 Gulf hurricane recovery, the largest wildfire complex in California history, the largest wildfire in Colorado history, and a mass casualty wildfire disaster across Oregon simultaneously. The system worked in the sense that most missions were performed and most emergencies were responded to. It did not work in the sense that response capacity was measurably slower than it would have been for any of these events. In isolation, the mutual aid systems were stretched to their limits, and their recovery timelines for the least media-covered events extended far longer than they should have. Post-event reviews by both FEMA and independent analysts documented specific delays, resource conflicts, and coordination gaps that would not have occurred in a single crisis environment. The 2020 experience is why every serious emergency manager in the country has spent the past 6 years explicitly planning for concurrent multi-region mega-disasters as the new operating baseline, not the exceptional case. FEMA has revised its regional resource prepositioning strategies. The Interagency Coordination Center has expanded its cross-regional dispatch protocols. State-to-state mutual aid compacts have been strengthened, and the doctrine that emerged is honest. The American disaster response system in this era must assume it will be running 2 or more simultaneous mega-crises during the peak season, must preposition accordingly, and must communicate to the public that response times in the second concurrent event may be slower than in the first. That last piece, the public communication of a slower response as a structural rather than a failure condition, is the hardest one to deliver in the middle of a crisis, and it is exactly the reality this week. The international benchmark for how a country builds a national response architecture around concurrent mega-disasters is Japan, a country whose disaster planning has always assumed that typhoons, earthquakes, and volcanic events can and do overlap. Japan's Cabinet Office Central Disaster Management Council operates under an explicit doctrine of simultaneous multi-hazard preparation. Its self-defense forces are trained and equipped for concurrent deployment across separate large events. Its mutual aid systems between prefectures are pre-programmed rather than case-by-case negotiated, and its public communication about the possibility of concurrent events, that if a large earthquake hits during a typhoon or a volcanic eruption during a heavy rainfall event, the response will need to be split, was a standing part of the country's disaster education from elementary school onward. The Japanese model is not automatically applicable to the American federal system, which handles vastly larger geographic distances and a very different political architecture. But it demonstrates that a country can institutionalize the assumption of concurrent disasters and organize itself accordingly. The United States is only in the early phases of that institutionalization. Let us be direct about the practical message, because information without action is just anxiety. If you are in the path of Hurricane Fernand or in its inland flooding zone, the standard hurricane preparedness rules apply, with one added consideration this week. Federal response resources are genuinely split, and the timeline for full external help arriving to your community may be longer than you would experience for the same storm at a different time of year. Prepare for 72 to 96 hours of self-sustaining conditions, not 48. Check on elderly and medically vulnerable neighbors. Do not attempt to cross flooded roadways. If you are in the Pacific Cascade Complex evacuation zone or the smoke plume downwind, mandatory evacuation orders are mandatory. The wind-driven fire run that hit Cascade Locks this morning came faster than any voluntary framework would have allowed compliance for air quality in the Portland area is at levels where outdoor exertion is dangerous for everyone, and staying indoors with sealed windows and, if possible, filtration is the correct posture until conditions improve. For everyone else across the country, this is the way to understand what mutual aid means and what it looks like when it flows through your state. Every state that sent air tankers or fire crews to the Pacific Cascade Complex, every state that sent National Guard water rescue teams to Louisiana, every hospital system that took on transferred patients from either region, all of that is the invisible architecture that lets the country handle two events at once. Know how your state participates in these systems. Support the mutual aid compacts and the personnel who work them. This week, they are the reason today's two disasters are not tomorrow's four. Final thought. Somewhere in a coordination center this morning, a dispatcher is deciding whether the next available Type 1 air tanker flies to the Pacific Cascade Complex's most threatened flank or is repositioned to a fire that is emerging in a different western mine. State that will need it by tomorrow. Somewhere else, a FEMA regional director is deciding whether a specialized federal medical team goes to Louisiana or is held in reserve for the injuries expected as evacuees move out of Oregon into shelter facilities. These are not dramatic decisions. They are the routine allocations of a system doing its job under a load it was not built for. Fernand and the Pacific Cascade Complex are not connected by cause. They share no meteorological driver, no geological trigger, no coordinated origin. What they share is a calendar and a country whose late summer season has become the annual window in which multiple simultaneous megadisasters are the operating norm, rather than the exceptional case. That is the structural shift the word disturbing in this title is honestly earning. Not that either event is uniquely terrible, that both are here at once, and that this is what late August in America now looks like. More years than not, in a warming world where the systems designed to help us were built for a different climate, the response will happen, the mutual aid will flow, both regions will be served imperfectly and unevenly over the days and weeks ahead. Communities will help each other in ways that federal capacity cannot replicate. And when this week is over, the next question will be whether the country builds the architecture to handle two disasters at once as a design capability rather than an emergency improvisation, or whether it continues to be surprised every August by what is no longer a surprise. We will track both events, the recovery timelines, and every major development from both regions as they unfold. Subscribe so you do not miss it, and leave that comment, your state, your situation, and how the response is looking from where you are. Because a country facing two crises at once needs to see itself in one frame. 6,000 likes. Let us go.